Hi, this is Rob Wade of Emotionally14.com, conductor of The Crazy Train, player 1 at the E14 Gamecast, and the supreme leader of Talk Star Wars. You're listening to Mike and the Genuine Chit-Chat podcast, and I commend your good taste.
Thanks to Rob from Emotionally14. I've included a link to their website below. I also guested on one of their episodes. It was my 50th episode, I think. I did part 2 of their episode, so go check out episode 50 of Genuine Chit Chat and go give Emotionally14 some love. And in this week's episode, I chat with a gentleman called Marcel Perkins, who is the founder of Latin Trails, which is a company that helps people travel around South America, primarily Ecuador, Peru, and the Galapagos Islands, in a way that's respectful to other people's cultures, while also being incredibly enjoyable and wholesome for all involved. Now, for a bit more detail on the subject matter, we talk about actually what Latin Trails does for a short while, and then we talk about some of the animals one could encounter if they go to the Galapagos, including sort of penguins and tortoises and things like that. We then speak about some of the cultures found in South America, including like Machu Picchu. Well, the Incas are the culture. Obviously, Machu Picchu is the thing that you go to visit to experience some of that culture. And we speak about some of the delicacies in South America, including some crazy meal with some tree worms. We talk about Ecuadorian chocolate, and we talk about loads of other things, including sort of some of the other activities you can do over there. That Marcel built 2 yachts, essentially, that they used to travel around some of the islands. Some of Marcel's personal views on zoos, as well as discussions on how travel affects the environment, and loads of other things. So for anyone who wants to travel in general or is really interested in South American culture, this is going to be a fantastic podcast for you. Now, I will just say a little caveat, which is this podcast, on Marcel's side, his audio isn't perfect. I mean, for the majority of it, you know, the chat's about an hour. For like 40 or so minutes of it, it is pretty much perfect as far as we could go. The quality isn't as good as my microphone, but it still sounds fine. You can hear everything. A phone rings a couple of times on his end, and towards the end, there is a part where you can hear children yelling in the background about something. But apart from that, it is fine. But I will say, if you are just tuning into the show and you've never listened to an episode of Genuine Chit Chat, generally the episodes are a much higher quality to this. If I do them in person, they're about as high quality as you can hear me now. And when I speak to people over Skype or Zoom, that sort of thing, usually I get either they record with a decent mic or I can clean up the audio a little bit. But as you may hear, the audio isn't absolutely perfect in this, so I do apologise for any of your audio files. If it bothers you that much, then check out another episode of Genuine Chit Chat. This is not all the podcasts, but I just thought I'd warn you guys before anyone starts sort of whinging about the audio not being absolutely perfect. But in all honesty, you can hear 99.9 of things Marcel says, and it's still a fantastic chat. So I do really recommend everyone just listens to it anyway. That's about it from me for now, guys. I'll be back at the end to talk about what we've got coming up. And yeah, follow on, the usual social media places, give us reviews if you like it, and share with your friends and people you know if you think people are going to enjoy it, especially taking a look through the back catalogue. If you enjoy this one, episode 2 of the podcast will probably be a good shout as well. The second ever episode with my friend TJ, because she talks about some of her travelling around Asia and things there. But I'll stop talking at the start now. I'll be back at the end to chat with you guys for a bit more stuff. And yeah, I'll speak to you then. Welcome to Genuine Chit Chat, where we have honest conversations with interesting people. And I'm your host, Mike Burton. Okay, and I'm here with Marcel Perkins. How are you doing, Marcel? Are you all right?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing, Mike?
Yeah, I'm doing fantastic. Yeah, as I was just saying before, where we pressed record over in the UK, we're having a heat wave, so that's quite nice for a change. But obviously, going to work in the day and just looking outside at the light, it makes me quite jealous in a sense of kind of what you do. You must have a lot of experiences going out and traveling a lot. I mean, I think you'd probably explain it better than anyone. Sort of, what is Latin Trails, and sort of how do you interlink with it, and what do you do in a way?
Latin Trails is what you would call a DMC. It's a destination management company. We're based in Quito, Ecuador, South America. And to explain what we do is we do inbound tours for travelers from all around the globe that want to come and visit Ecuador. Mm-hmm. We work on a business-to-business basis, meaning that we work with travel agents in the UK, the United States, in Germany, in Australia, and other places around the world. And we act as their local representatives, offering travel services to people that want to get to see the culture, the nature, and the wonders of Ecuador.
Well, that's incredible. And is it just Ecuador you guys do, or are there other places you sort of travel to as well?
Well, we do quite a lot in South America in general. We travel to Peru and then all of the Amazon basin. meaning the main ports in the Amazon, because we work a lot with the riverboat cruises that would explore the small tributaries of the main Amazon River in search of wildlife. These would be Manaus in Brazil, Trinidad in Bolivia, Iquitos in Peru, and then, of course, Francisco de Orellana in Ecuador. That in regards to the Amazon basin. But in general, all of Peru we cover, trips to Machu Picchu, the Andes around Cusco, and in Ecuador we cover the entire country, and the Galapagos Islands, of course.
Yeah, and that's incredible. And you mentioned Machu Picchu there. But linking with one of the things is with history, obviously, like Machu Picchu, and obviously in Mexico, there's Chichen Itza, these sort of different ancient civilizations. Do you have a passion in sort of the exploration of these sort of places?
Well, I do actually, but my personal passion is nature travel. So I really love visiting places like the Amazon, Pantanal, the Galapagos Islands, of course, and other reserves around the Andes. Of course, I am also enamored with the culture of Ecuador and Peru as well. The Inca ruins at Machu Picchu are amazing, and as you mentioned, Chichen Itza, it's a totally different culture, but it's quite as amazing as well.
Yeah, I mean, so what are some of the other sort of nature places that you've gone to? Sort of, obviously, you've been to the Amazonian rainforest. Do you centrally go around the South Americas because it's quite local to you, or there are other places you like to sort of travel and experience around the world?
I travel a lot around South America. It's actually it's our home in a way. And of course, there's different areas of the Amazon, and there's different types of rainforest. There's mountain rainforest, which is at the very end of the Amazon, which is part of Ecuador. And then there's the lowland rainforest of the Amazon basin, which can be divided into areas that can be navigatable on the Amazon River, on small tributaries and creeks where you actually don't really go through hikes, but you're going through flooded rainforest. And then there's another area that is, in general, around the Amazon on the lower rain season, where you actually can hike through the forest. So there's different parts of the Amazon itself. And then I've enjoyed also exploring the cloud forests on both sides of the Andes of Ecuador and in Peru as well. These are areas we explore. I would say I work in a way, because this is where we actually offer services to our guests that come from around the world. But on my bucket list, I do have Antarctica.
Oh wow!
I do have the polar bears in Churchill, Canada. That's on my personal list that I still have to complete, but. The Amazon is an area that I know well, and the Galapagos Islands as well.
What are your favorite kind of creatures or animals that you see that you love seeing in the wild? Some of your favorites?
Well, I would have to refer to the Galapagos Islands in general. It's just because the wildlife there is very tame and it's not afraid of humans. It's never been attacked by humans, so it doesn't feel threatened. And it has a different behavior that you'd find from wildlife anywhere else on the planet. So some of my favorite creatures to see there are penguins. You can snorkel with them. You can just float up face to face with the penguin, the Galapagos Islands, or spot a marine iguana. It's the only ocean-going lizard in the world. You can both see it underwater or on the ground in the Galapagos. They feed on algae while they're underwater, but on the ground they just sit tamely. But if you look at it, it looks like a small Godzilla. It's a lizard, but it's vegetarian. No worries there. Of course, the giant tortoises of Galapagos are very interesting as well. It's a very slow animal, and you have to have a lot of patience with it. But it's quite unique. The size, just knowing that this creature could be even older than yourself, and it's only found in these islands.
Yeah, I mean, those sort of creatures are incredible. I mean, I was thinking about sort of turtles and penguins, and yeah, a lot of those creatures are very sort of peaceful. It's a nice little place, and obviously I haven't seen them in the wild, so obviously I don't have the same sort of perspective on them. But seeing them in the wild is one of those things which it must be incredible. I mean, I'm planning on going on a trip to Mexico actually in August, and I'm hopefully going to be going swimming with turtles as well. So with that in mind, with your sort of tours and things, do you get a lot of people from, obviously you mentioned the UK slightly earlier, but do you have a lot of people from around the world all coming to South America using your service? Because I would imagine so, with all the sort of huge amount of aspects that make it such an interesting place to go.
Well, yes, we do have we have travelers that will, as I said, from all corners of the world. We run 2 yachts in the Galapagos Islands. One of them is the Galapagos Seaman Journey, and the other one is the Galapagos Sea Star Journey. Both cater to 16 guests each, meaning we have 8 cabins on board each of them. And at any given time, we'll have easily 8 to 12 different nationalities on board.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
So it's not just people from around the world, but it's multicultural couples. And it's just such a unique destination that it really doesn't attract one nationality. It attracts a type of person who loves wildlife. And you'll find this anywhere in every country around the world. We've had travelers from Russia, from China, from Japan, from Slovenia, and of course from the UK as from where you are. But yeah, we do have travelers from all over the globe.
And that must be an incredible thing to sort of, obviously in the world there's so many things that are so negative, but going into a place like that where you see all kinds of people obviously just enjoying the beauty of nature, and sort of, obviously there are certain parts of nature that can be very scary, very upsetting, but with so many of the things that you've spoken about, it is a lot more of the sort of the peaceful ones. So other than the animals, which all do sound incredible, what other sort of things do you like, well, does Latin trails explore? Like I've got notes here about you sort of do horseback riding and biking as well, but they mentions historical parts as well. So what are some of the other aspects?
Some of the other aspects are cultural encounters with indigenous people. And both in the Amazon and in the Andes. We visit the textile market at Otavalo, for example. That's not just a market, but the villages that are surrounding it. At the market, you find it's a handicraft market, and you find the people from Otavalo, the Otavaleños, as we call them, wearing their typical attire and putting their goods for sale. These are handmade goods, carved in wood, leather, textiles. They make for a good souvenir, but at the same time, they trade it with other people as well. So it's an interactive market where you can actually bargain with them and walk around and at the different stalls, see different arts and crafts. Everything there is handmade. And in the small villages nearby, we can visit the homes of certain people and see their own workshops and how they craft these goods. So culturally speaking, this is one of the live cultures Ecuador offers. For example, on the other hand, if we visit Machu Picchu, we're talking about a culture that left the remnants of it. So we get to see more of a archaeological site. It's not a live culture, but it's an amazing monument to engineering. But engineering, we're talking about more than 500 years ago, because Machu Picchu was built on a mountain in the middle of the Amazon rainforest, where there was no cranes, there was no wheels or anything like that to pull these giant stones up onto this mountain, in the middle of nowhere. Now, and nowadays you can reach it by train. Well, not exactly to the ruins, but to the bottom of it. And then you'd have to take a bus up to the top of the hill. But if you think, the distance from Cusco to Machu Picchu, or from the Sacred Valley where they got the stones to take them all the way to Machu Picchu, it's just hard to imagine that this was done by humans.
I know what you mean. I mean, it's funny how unimpressive it is by comparison, but in the UK we have Stonehenge, and it's obviously not such an insanely incredible monument as something like Machu Picchu, but people love seeing it. Just for anyone who isn't aware, it's basically a circle of sort of stone rectangles in sort of several archway formations, and it's one of the reasons people find it so incredible was because it dates back to hundreds, if not I think thousands of years ago, and it moved from like the actual stone that was used was from such an incredible, like hundreds, if not I think thousands of like miles, I think it's more hundreds miles away. And it was like in those sort of times, how they actually managed to do that is, as you say, is a monument to itself. But then with a place like Machu Picchu, you see the sort of incredible architecture of what they can actually achieve in those times. And it is just, it's incredible. When you're in places such as those, you feel this sort of this breath of history, like things have sort of transpired here, like ancestry and whatnot. And so leading into that, obviously, to get a little bit more about yourself, if I'm correct, were you born in America and then you moved to Ecuador? Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. I was born in New Jersey, the East Coast of the United States. My father, he's from New Jersey as well. And my mother, she's Ecuadorian. So we moved to Ecuador when I was 16 years old. But before that, I grew up between both East Coast and Ecuador. And from 16 years onward, I've lived in Ecuador. I did my university studies in the United States and in Ecuador. taking both in both cultures. I am fully bilingual. This is thanks to both my parents speaking each in their native tongues. That's a little bit about me on that side. But I've made my life in Ecuador with my family. I have 3 kids and I'm happily married. So that's a little bit about me. But about what we do in Latin Trails is we focus on more than just travel itineraries. We actually create experiences for our guests.
Yeah, and also obviously with you having that sort of culture between the two, is that one of the reasons sort of you decided to pursue this sort of, and was it just yourself who started this, or were you a part of a team that has created this Latin Trails?
Well, the reason I decided to pursue it was because of the cultural gap there is between Ecuador and the United States, that I felt, that we could actually create bridges and have people from North America initially explore South America, Ecuador, and Peru, which are extremely beautiful countries, and have a better understanding for the people that, have come from these countries to live in the United States, that, in the form of immigrants and all that, and to create a sense of respect for them. Which there is, but, a sense of better understanding of what they can find in South America. And eventually this turned into a business where we've been in contact with agents from all over the globe, and now we cater to over 40 nationalities at any given time.
Yeah, and once again, that's an incredible feat in itself. And regarding how you started, I wanted to ask sort of how long ago was it, and was there a specific moment that you kind of decided to do this, or was it sort of quite a long process that you kind of had mulling around for a while?
Well, it always had been in my mind and in our mind, because my parents always they had a passion for exploring the region, showing me and my siblings the beauty of Ecuador, but not just Ecuador, but of all of South America where we were living, and of course as well throughout the United States. So I actually grew up traveling a lot. We did road trips crossing the entire United States from New Jersey all the way to Texas a few times. But we also did the same throughout South America. And we explored many of the places that are very popular now, which back then were just places that were interesting in terms of history or culture. So I kind of grew up doing this, and I really fell in love with the Amazon and other areas, as I mentioned. And then the turning point was in 2002, actually, when we started, where I was promoting cruises to the Galapagos Islands for one of the larger cruise lines, and I decided that I wanted to do something a little bit more meaningful and share Ecuador at large, Peru at large, with many people from around the globe, especially Ecuador, because it's not such a well-known destination, but it's extremely beautiful. Because if you look at the geography of Ecuador, you have the Andes, the Amazon, the Pacific coast, and the Galapagos Islands, which sounds great just there. But if you look at the topography of our planet and you go from the equator towards the poles, you go anywhere from mangrove to rainforest, dry forest, cloud forest. You'll pass by through tundra, grasslands, and eventually you'll reach the poles where you have glaciers. Well, Ecuador on a smaller scale, if you go from the equator on a vertical trip, you'll pass through every single one of these regions until you reach the tip of the volcanoes where you have glaciers. So you can see all the almost every geographical region from our planet. It can be represented throughout Ecuador. This gives a diversity in terms of scenery, in terms of ingredients for food, in terms of culture, because each culture has adapted to its climatic level. And of course, this gives an amazing playground to explore in a very small country, which is actually the longest flight within the country is a half hour. And you can drive from side to side in about 14 to 15 hours.
Oh, wow. I was going to ask about what is the kind of delicacies people can expect going to somewhere like Ecuador? I mean, I personally must say I'm not familiar with it. And also, is it, as you said, with the different cultures and almost regions of it, does it change per region also?
Yes, of course. Absolutely. I mean, well, in terms of food, if you're in the Amazon, we have, I'll describe a couple of dishes, and I guess that can do, but it's not just there. It's, you have freshwater fish from the Amazon, like the paiche. This can be prepared in a maito. This is prepared within a type of a leaf that's called bijao. It would be similar to a banana leaf, but it's a little bit different. And it has different pickles from the Amazon region, herbs that give it a distinctive flavor. and you can it's wrapped up and it's cooked within charcoal. So it gives a very special flavor to fish, and it's combined with manioc root, yuca, which is known like that, which is cassava.
Okay.
Those are three names for it. And then it's seasoned with local herbs. So it actually has a unique flavor you can't find this anywhere else than in the Amazon region. Now in Ecuador, you have another version of it, which is called ayampaco. Ayampaco is the same, but it's with the added ingredients of having rice, and instead of fish, you have chicken. But it's cooked within the leaves. It gives it a very juicy flavor, very distinctive. It picks up this very strong herbal flavor to it. Very, very delicious. This is a little bit about the Amazon without getting too exotic. Then in the Andes, throughout Ecuador and Peru, you have roasted pork, you have guinea pig, you have lamb stew. You have in Ecuador alone, you have 2,000 different types of soup.
Oh wow!
And I could go onwards with that. Then in the coast of Ecuador and in the coast of Peru, you have ceviche. Ceviche is raw fish. It's marinated in lemon, and then you have different ways of preparing it with onion. In Peru, it's with onion. You have it's a little bit more, I wouldn't say basic, but it's just very few ingredients, but very well seasoned and extremely delicious. In Ecuador, it's a little bit more complex because each region adds something different to it. So you can actually have ceviche in the Andes of Ecuador, and instead, ceviche usually in the coast, it's presented with fried plantain chips. And you have, depending on the part of the coast, you can actually have a type of peanuts grinded and added in a peanut salt, which is called sal prieta in Spanish. Or in the Andes, you actually have it combined with toasted corn instead of the plantain chips. So there's different versions of it, but that's a little bit about the food in Ecuador. And these are just three staple dishes out of a large list I could go through.
Well, I was going to say, just you said you could go a bit more exotic. Could you give us one really, really different kind of dish that's just kind of really obscure that maybe even you really like?
Yes, and both in the Ecuadorian and in the Peruvian Amazon, we have what in Peru they call suri, and in Ecuador we call it chontacuro. These are the worms from the palm, the heart of palm. So these worms actually have you would almost say they have a taste of chestnut within them, and you can cook them, and people eat them as a delicacy, actually.
Oh wow, that is incredible. I mean, I've heard a lot of not so, like, obviously in England it's a very Western culture, so people often, when you speak about eating bugs and things, people kind of go, oh, but like I've always thought about it with a lot of people eat crickets and those sorts of things in some other places across the world. There's the wider scope for what sort of things you can eat from bugs, because a lot of bugs have got a lot of protein in, a lot of like surprise nutrients, and people have even said if all the animals died out or some sort of thing happened where we overpopulated too much, insects would actually be a potentially really good source of all these sort of nutrition and things. So hearing about the worm it's very interesting, and I'd always think if I went to that sort of region, I'd love to try something like that. I mean, I know quite a few people are quite squeamish.
Well, yes, of course, and that's and I wouldn't expect a guest or one of our visitors to go ahead and eat worms. But not all of them. But I mean, on the other hand, the Amazon is extremely rich in other things. You have guayusa, which is a superfood. It's a plant. You dry it and you make an infusion of it, and it actually has so many antioxidants that it's refreshing. It actually it's from the Amazon, but it can help you actually in the Andes to counter the counter effect against altitude sickness. So it's really. I mean, that's one thing. Also, I mean, throughout the original cocoa bean on the planet is from the Amazon region of Ecuador. So you do have Ecuador's chocolate at the moment is really taking over the world in a way that it's earning gold medals in all the contests because it's a different type of chocolate. You see, the cocoa beans from Ecuador are the fine aroma cocoa beans. And we're blessed for the reason of having micro plantations, meaning it's not a mono plantation where you have thousands of hectares of cocoa beans, in line, but it's actually small farmers that have cocoa beans in their farms, but they're planted next to other types of fruits, corn, or other agricultural products. It's more like a backyard garden almost, but at a larger scale. So this with modern processing, a lot of Ecuadorian chefs studying the process of chocolate, they've come to, let's not use the word discover, but they've come to find that, the cocoa bean actually absorbs the flavors and the scents of everything that's planted around it.
Oh, wow.
And it can actually vary in flavor from where it's grown, at the altitude, or the amount of rain it receives. So 2 different chocolate bars without added ingredients can taste different. Almost like if you were trying to taste 2 different, types of wine, or, a Cabernet or a Carmenere, or comparing, a Malbec or a Merlot, different types of wine. You would find this from different types of chocolate bars that have been grown from different plantations, because one of them had bananas next to them, the other one had papayas next to them. And you can find this small, subtle aftertaste that it makes it a real delicacy. So that's another thing we can, that somebody coming to Ecuador can look forward to is, really finding some of the best chocolate on the planet without, not chocolate mixed with milk and sugar. We're talking about chocolate without added ingredients that has been harvested and processed in a very fine way to keep these subtle notes in each bar.
Yeah, man, and that sounds lovely. I mean, we have a franchise, I guess, a shop over here called Hotel Chocolat. It's chocolate in French, and they have like really expensive chocolate in there. And I have seen a lot of the, especially the darker bars of chocolate, saying Ecuador, and they're some of the more expensive ones. And I did actually get my mum some the other celebration, I think it was birthday or something, and she absolutely loved it. And she said it was this sort of very different taste. Now I have seen it in a lot of sort of chocolatier places using a lot more of that kind of chocolate. So it's very interesting to hear about the sort of different places where it has its own flavor. It sounds incredible. You must get so many different amazing flavors of chocolate over there, and so many other desserts from it.
Yes, and it's developing actually, because you see that one thing is, the technique in processing chocolate. Of course, it's been pioneered in Belgium and in Switzerland, but now a lot of that technique has been passed on to chefs in Ecuador, and they have the source, which is the cocoa beans. And what really makes it special is how it's harvested, how it's planted, how it's, how the agricultural process is taking place. So for foodies, yes, there is more than just worms or anything like that. No, and you have, and we're talking about, a part of Ecuador that's the Andes, but then you have exotic fruits like naranjilla. It's native to Ecuador and Colombia. In Colombia, it's known as lulu, and it can't really be found anywhere else as an original fruit. And it's, I would say it's family of the passion fruit, but a bit different. It's a bit more acid, and it's extremely delicious.
Oh, that does sound great.
So we do have everything that you'd expect for vegans and vegetarians as well. Not just anybody wanting to go and and eat everything they say, but which is not really the case. But it's just an exotic combination of flavors that can, with the chefs nowadays, the worms actually. We had an experience where we actually sourced ingredients from the Amazon, and we just placed them on inside a kitchen with one of the chefs, and he had to prepare different dishes from it, and of course it had the worms. So everybody at the table would not just jump out and say, okay, this is done. Well, he made a special type of salt out of it and butter from it and different seasonings from the worms.
Oh wow!
And then that way everybody was able to eat it. And so the technique is gone quite a way in terms of cooking in Ecuador, but with local ingredients and all this variety of ingredients, making it one of the unique gastronomies in the region, which should be, I think it will be flying high pretty soon, just the same way Peru has done, because Peru is also a very biodiverse country. And it's worldwide known for pisco and ceviche. Well, Ecuador has its own versions as well, but Peru has its Andean foods as well, potato and corn based as well. In Peru, you have 3,000 varieties of potatoes.
Oh wow, that's still an incredible amount.
Yeah, so it's amazing what they can prepare, and this is why many Peruvian chefs have made it to opening restaurants in London, Berlin, and other important cities around the globe.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I was just thinking about when you're obviously talking about the chefs having these sort of other techniques and things, I imagine the mix between not only having all these exotic plants as well as, all the different animals and obviously the fish, with not only all of those different things to choose from, but also the different sort of parts of Ecuador's culture, ones, from the different regions, they would have to utilize their own cooking methods with whatever they just had at the time. And as you've been saying, as it's sort of times progressed and people are more interconnected, they have got these specific cooking styles that were central to their region, and then it's spreading to the other regions, and obviously even more so now the rest of the world, while also being able to use even more ingredients. So it's got this, like when you said more towards the start with a lot of the dishes, some use sort of plantain chips while others use sort of banana leaves, and it's like it's similar, or like different plants, but it's similar cooking methods and things, and it's just there's so much mixing there, as you see, biodiversity, and it's really interesting to hear about all those sorts of things. And with the cultures themselves, what sort of practices do people do that's different to the standard sort of American life?
Well, for starters, I mean, some people in the Amazon, they still have their shamanic rituals. And they would, you have them, the shaman himself still drinks hallucinogenous herbs like ayahuasca to take a spiritual trip and interpretate the dreams of people or their thoughts or their feelings. And going into holistic healing, or that's one, or in the Amazon, the herbal doctors that will actually, they know that, a snake bite can be cured with this plant. Or one day they can say, okay, I want my wife not to have kids for 3 years, so she'll drink this herbal infusion. And after 3 years, I want her to have kids, so I'll give her this other one to reactivate her reproductive system. So in terms of medicine and ancestral knowledge, it's passed on quite verbally, actually, still in the Amazon. But that's one thing. The way of life, again, living in small huts inside the rainforest, now settling down a little bit. Yes, there is occidentalization, if you want to call it that way, or whatever you want to call it, is modern world flowing into these tribes, where you'll see a satellite antenna, and you'll see TVs, you'll see blue jeans and T-shirts. So nothing, not expecting to go around running around naked or anything like that. It's just, people that have a different way of life, different beliefs. This is in the Amazon. In the Andes, people still wear their traditional attire at certain places like Otavalo, where they wear ponchos and they keep their hair long. They wear a wool hat, and that's part of their attire. And at another town, they have a different color poncho and a different color hat, or a different size hat. This is throughout the Andes. Women can wear embroidered skirts that are wrapped around, and depending on their belt and then depending on their earrings and on their shirt brioche, it could mean that they're married or they're single. The way they put on their belts and things like that, and it's very colorful for one part. And of course, traditional celebrations like the Inti Raymi throughout the Andes, which is the festival of the sun, which has been overlapped with the harvest festival. In terms of food as well, I mean, in Ecuador you have fanesca, which is cooking 12 different grains into a soup at the time of harvest as well. But this is it's in Easter, and it represents, religiously speaking, it represents the 12 apostles, one for each grain. But really, in an indigenous cosmovision, it's actually the harvest festival, where they're celebrating the harvesting of all these grains. Onwards to the coast, you have people still living in huts and fishing on an artisan basis, from smaller boats. Yes, they do have fishing nets as well, but it's more like done in a traditional way, a little bit more laid back, where things are still on the slow road. It's changing a little, and this is happening all over the globe, but still people living in a traditional way.
Yeah, I mean, all of those things are sort of very, very interesting to see and hear about. I mean, obviously, we don't see those sorts of perspectives in a lot of the Western world. I mean, there's many different sides to, obviously, as you mentioned, medicine and other sort of ritualistic things, which people don't always understand, but I always find it's very important for people to sort of go witness and experience. I mean, you have obviously the more sort of Eastern cultures have their own sort of type of medicine, and they're a lot more into sort of meditation and those sorts of things. While you go into the more indigenous people of the South Americas and certain other places in the globe, and it is about the sort of, a lot more about the garbs and a lot more about sort of the herbs you drink. And obviously ayahuasca being something that a lot of people in America are going down to Peru and places like that to try these things, to try and have these sorts of ritualistic experiences. And, you know, I've heard a lot of people have had transformative experiences going to these sorts of places. And with Latin trails, is that something that you find that when people have this time traveling around Ecuador and things, they come back thinking or feeling like they've had that sort of transformative experience of seeing all these different cultures as well as experiencing what they've been experiencing, especially the food, I'd imagine, too?
Yeah, with the food, with the meeting different cultures, yes. We don't offer any ayahuasca trips. Just out of basic principle for us, it's something that is considered sacred and it shouldn't be misused.
That's fair enough. Yeah, that's understandable.
That's for us, it's really something we wouldn't offer, because also it can be dangerous if it's not done right, because it could be a trip with no return.
Yeah, exactly. And it's using the DMT, dimethyltryptamine, that people can use in other ways and things, which can obviously be problematic for some people. And that's not the only thing to come down here like I'm there, go down to Ecuador and Peru and those sort of places. It's not like it's a important part of the culture, and also there is such an endless amount of other things to experience. It's like to, not do that one thing. It's like there's so much more you wouldn't even need to have to think about that sort of specific part. There's so much beauty in the nature of the Amazonian rainforest and all the other creatures that you would have that sort of transformative changing experience without any need for those sorts of chemicals anyway, I'd imagine.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, it's something that, you wouldn't need to have a transformative experience, because you have so many things to do. I mean, we're talking just about the surface here. Because a lot of our trips can involve whitewater rafting, riding a bicycle down the side of a volcano, horseback riding through the rainforest, hiking, not really necessarily summiting, one of the volcanoes, but hiking around the highlands, camping, or going from lodge to lodge, just doing the Inca Trail, which is a tremendous trip. I mean, a tremendous experience, because you're walking on stone throughout the mountains, and it's all paved out. And it's like a highway, but, in the middle of nowhere, where you still think, well, how do they get these slabs of stone to build this, pathway up to the mountains, at this altitude, through these forests, through this, geography? Or a more simple trip, which is the Devil's Nose train ride in Ecuador, where a train to get down the face of a mountain has to go down on switchbacks because of the steepness of it, the difference in altitude, and all these engineering processes. And this is actually not so far back. It's from the early 1900s. The train was opened in 1909. So at that time, they still had to find a way of, going down the mountain by switchbacks, not just necessarily, going straight down or something like that.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, with all those sorts of things in place you can do, would you agree that it's nice for people to go down there and switch off from, technology has its place and its important things in many ways, but obviously when you can go down there and go, when you're riding a bike, you shouldn't be, so you wouldn't be on your phone while you're doing it, when you're doing horseback riding, when you're camping, when you're doing a lot of these things, it's nice for a lot of people have this disconnect from that and just kind of experience the world in a more true form, without sort of the buzz of technology, the noise of it. You kind of get a true feeling of tranquility. I mean, I found that from camping. I assume that when you've been going around Ecuador, especially when you were younger, you found that sort of, obviously it was slightly different due to the technology not being the same as when you were younger, but even the hustle and bustle of city life, like being in amongst nature is unlike anything else.
Of course. I mean, sleeping in the Amazon, crickets and all sound life that is around you, and it's quite unique, actually. It's not, that's for one thing. Then, in the Galapagos Islands, sleeping on board a small boat to get from island to island, for people that have never been on a boat, sleeping on a yacht, it's also a unique experience. Some people are up to it, others are not, and there's different ways of exploring the islands. Or snorkeling. You're swimming and you see sharks go swimming right under you in the Galapagos Islands. But, these animals are so well fed that they will not look at humans as, anything to be interrupted with. they just swim on their way, and that's the way with animals in the Galapagos in general.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, as I said, with being out in these sort of different environments is also incredibly healthy for someone. Like, having a change of environment from the standard day to day is something that people really underestimate as being healthy. Even if you're in a place that you enjoy and you're very comfortable in things, it's always good not only to go out and experience the different culture, but also if you separate yourself from the large amount of people aspect, and you do just go around to these places and just walk through a forest, go experience like looking over a mountain and seeing countless fields. I mean, I've hiked up a mountain in England. There's only 3 that are really that large and noteworthy, but I hiked the way up it. It was snowing, and it was this obviously incredibly different temperature to over in Ecuador. But having that experience, that memory is going to be with me forever, and it's the memories that you can create in with Latin trails and in Ecuador and Peru that are not only different from the day to day, which is incredibly important, but also it just creates a memory, and like those are invaluable. At the end of the day, that's all you have is the memories of these experiences.
And that's what we want to create, is something people can take back with them for the rest of their lives, and that is not just something you can hold on to or you can carry in a bag as a souvenir. This is something, an interaction or a skill you've learned from meeting with somebody else.
Yeah, precisely. And I want to ask, you touched on it slightly earlier about the 2 yachts. Have I got the information right that you built these yachts, or at least refurbished them in some way?
The catamaran, the Seaman Journey, was built in 2007. We took part in the design of this boat. This was not built by us specifically, but the Sea Star Journey was built from us from the ground up.
Oh, wow.
This yacht was built actually. My partner, he's quite into engineering a lot, and he decided to actually use a recycled cement factory to source iron, and that is actually the keel of the boat. So it's been built from a recycled cement factory, part of it at least, and then from the ground up with artisans. You see, the boat was not printed out at a modern shipyard. It was actually built by the Guayas River in Guayaquil by people welding by hand, everything. So the yacht itself is a hand-built yacht, where we had carpenters come and they actually formed every piece of furniture right there at the boat. The walls, everything was placed there, from metal onwards, from the ground up. So it's quite an artisan boat on one side, but on the other hand, it's a very upmarket boat because of its size, the facilities it offers, and everything. And it was just built in a very creative way.
Well, that's incredible. And also, I know on Latin Trails it mentions about sort of being an eco lodge. I wonder if you could sort of discuss sort of how the connectivity, the synergy with the environment that you have, especially with the way you go about sort of exploring the local landscape, as well as with the locations that you choose.
We have to recognize from the very beginning is that travel has a big, huge impact. If we didn't want to have an impact on the environment, we would have to stay home and walk, and everything we would do would be by foot. And that is not the reality of the world nowadays. So just by going on, taking a flight, we are affecting the environment. With the cruises in Galapagos, going from island to island, although we have recycling systems on board and water processing, we are affecting the environment one way or another. By staying at a hotel in Ecuador or in any place around the world, we are affecting the environment. We're using water, we're using resources. We recognize this impact, and we try as much as possible to reduce it. We participate in several projects. One of them is a lodge in the Amazon called Hakuna Matata. It has 124 hectares of rainforest, which at some point were grasslands and cattle. It was a cattle ranch.
Okay.
At the very verge of the Amazon, at the end of the Andes. And we decided, this is something that has been the lodge was actually pre-built already when we purchased it, but we invested in this project because it was protecting these hectares and restoring rainforest. So At the moment, at this present moment, we've achieved that from being, just plain grassland. Now we have a secondary growth forest around the whole area. This is one part, the lower part of the reserve, because the other part is in the mountain, and we do have primary rainforest there as well. But the major part of the reserve, about 80 hectares, is secondary forest, and we've put a statute into the constitution of the lodge where this cannot be touched for another 200 years. So eventually it will become primary rainforest once again. And we try to add little by little land to this project. So that's a little bit of trying to manage our impact. One of the things we do also, as much as when we brief our guests on conservation, on how we're impacting, and on the rules of each place, and of course on respecting the local cultures and understanding, their way of life, and not being intrusive, but being immersive in the sense of allowing it to be a cultural exchange where they can learn from us as well.
Yeah. One thing that you said there about sort of you purchasing part of the rainforest and things, in the future, do you plan on sort of expanding, obviously alongside the expansion of Latin Trails as a company, are you planning on expanding sort of the amount that you can purchase to sort of protect more of the land?
That is in the plans. It's something that is, it's a project that has to be self-sustainable. And little by little, we've been adding land to this project. So eventually it will grow. Latin Trails, in terms of expanding, we would like to focus more than on growth or becoming a large company. We would like to focus on expanding in terms of quality and in terms of reaching a more, let's say, our guests, we usually target the high end of the market. Wouldn't call it exactly luxury travel, but more focused on experiences. So our target is to actually improve what we do. And yes, become a little bit greener at the same time. But it is a process which we have laid out. And eventually, we don't plan at the moment. We don't plan to add more boats, but we've built a small hotel in Quito, for example. It's called Ila Experience Hotel, and this is from an old colonial mansion in the downtown area, in the historic part of Quito, Ecuador. And it's a 10-room property. It's more than a hotel. I would call it a home, a luxury home, where our guests can interact with the neighborhood that's around them. We have a great relationship with our neighbors, and they can participate in unique experiences every day. Handcrafts like weaving a straw hat, doing watercolor painting with a local artist, making ice cream with one of our neighbors, and private curated walks to one of the monasteries that are nearby, or visiting one of our neighbors at their house. In general, we've crafted a list of about 40 different experiences, but at the same time, these are friendly with our neighbors because they actually earn an income from these experiences.
Yeah, and that's kind of what one has to try and do when you're trying to, as you said earlier, cross the bridge between certain cultures and things. You have to do it in a way that is mutually beneficial. And the way that it sounds like you're doing it is in more than just sort of a two-way system, but it's also in even more than that, with not only sort of the other people from across the world coming into sort of Ecuador, Peru, and Galapagos, those sort of places, and interacting with individuals, but also in a sense of with us as humans, with the nature, and also animals themselves. And in that same vein, I'm just intrigued by your own opinion on sort of zoos themselves and conservation. Do you have, obviously with conservation itself, I would imagine you are passionate about that sort of thing, but I'm just interested in zoos, if you are more for them or if you're more leaning on leave nature by itself.
This is my personal view. Yeah. I am not too happy with zoos because bringing in an animal from a different environment, taking it out of its wild area is not. I don't see it as a humane thing. I don't see how a polar bear can be comfortable in the northern hemisphere during the summer.
Yeah.
Or, basically it's not, I don't see it being proper treatment for wildlife. I think wildlife should remain in their habitat. Now, having said that, there is a few zoos that take care of local animals that have been rescued, and that, they would probably not be able to survive in the wild, but they're kept in their same environments. They're not exported as a token of as an oddity to display within a cage. But they're actually, I can't say it's 100% humane at these rescue centers, but at least they're kept within their area, and it's animals that have been rescued from, let's say, an ocelot that has been, harvesting off the chickens of a community, and eventually this local tribe in the jungle is going to hunt it down. So, if it can be, kept away from that and, tried to be reinserted, but within another area deeper in the forest, if they realize that it still has its hunting skills and still can survive, that's fine. Otherwise, sometimes they've had the need to actually keep it within let's say a closed environment, not necessarily, which is a nice word, sounds that, but it's just a giant cage, and then kept there to avoid it from being killed for hunting down, local livestock. So there's a difference. I would think that is a little bit more sensible, but at the same time, it does, it comes to the borderline when you decide to keep it because it's bringing you an income from people that are coming to visit to see it, or if you're keeping it because it cannot be released.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very fair point. I mean, I feel similarly to you do. I think if it's doing more help either for conservation or to save the animal itself, then yeah, it can be helpful, but then it does toe that line. If I've seen it in zoos before where there's zoos in England where you have tigers there, and it's like, we've saved these tigers from poaching because there's only, this small amount of them left in the world. And it's that really hard line, do we want to have the tigers all safe in sort of captivity and potentially not happy with it? Or do we want to let poachers, or obviously other people, kill them? And obviously there's hundreds of other sort of factors that go into it. It's not just that simple, and it's obviously not an easy question to answer at all, and it's not something we can just have an easy solution for. It's just people have to kind of be a bit more conscious, and I think that's exactly what you're trying to achieve. You're not just sort of not being an echo warrior and forcing it down people's throats, but it's like, well, if you come to our place, we're going to give back. We're going to give back to the community. We're going to give back to nature, and it works in a synergistic circle. And with that as well, I want to ask some other part is, I'm quite interested in religious architecture. I'm not a religious individual myself, but I really like religious architecture. And I seem to recall seeing a couple of pictures. I think it was in Quito, of some sort of large church or cathedral of some sort.
Oh, actually, Quito, Ecuador is a very strong center for religious art, because the Quito School of Art, it was born from the blend of a local artisan work from the indigenous people, the Incas and the pre-Incas that lived in this region, taught by monks from both Italy and Spain. You had the Dominicans, which were the Italian monks, and the Franciscans, which were not necessarily a Spanish religious order, but they had come in from Spain. And what they did is they taught them to craft religious stories throughout paintings, throughout sculptures, throughout different forms of art. And this is kept up to the day in churches. Some of them are covered in gold leaf, and they're majestic with entire areas where you can see tons of gold, literally, blended in with the paintings and sculptures and all this majestic form of art that is, the religion, the religious driven art, if you want to call it that way. And this can be found throughout the different churches of Quito and throughout several museums in the city as well. But also walking through the streets of the city, you can see not just religious art, but the colonial architecture, the local form of art, and the blend between the Spanish colonial and the indigenous Andean art form.
Yeah, I mean, I do like seeing art in a lot of different places. When you go across the world, you can see it in, there's a couple of museums in England. One of them is the Powell Cotton Museum, and it's all about an adventurer who went to Africa, for example. And you see sort of a lot of the items they have there and a lot of the sort of variations on things. But in the same museum, they also have similar objects, primarily sort of weapons and equipment and things from other parts of the world, which are similar, but do have that slight difference. And I think that seeing the streets of a different country. I mean, I've traveled around Europe, which obviously is not quite as different as sort of the South Americas or as Africa, as I was speaking about a moment ago. But even in Europe, you go to the cities, you go down sort of the main streets in the bigger parts, and you see a lot of the architecture. And it's always just very interesting to see how different cultures, obviously, they made food, as we discussed, they have sort of rituals or things they do, as well as clothing. But the houses that they build to live in, every place you go has its own sense of personality. And from what you're telling me, it sounds like Ecuador has just a huge amount of personality.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it has, it's different even from, South America in general is quite different from, any other area around the world. But between Ecuador and Peru, you can find subtle differences. And as I mentioned, I mean, if you want to do it on a summarized version, Peru has on display more archaeological sites, while Ecuador has on display more live cultures. And that's one thing. Now, in general in South America, but referring to Ecuador and the Andes, you do have a lot of things that are still made by hand.
Mm.
And it's a country where you will not find souvenirs that say made in ... Not because, it's not just, everything is outsourced to just one place. It's outsourced all over the world now. And a lot of souvenirs are outsourced. Well, in Ecuador, you'll find things that are still made by hand. And you can still go to the shop and find the person that is crafting it, weaving it, sculpturing it, chiseling it, whatever you want to call it, but is doing it by hand. And this is really important. You find things that, maybe are still undervalued within Ecuador, but in other parts of the world where you can't find anything made by hand, it has a tremendous value.
No, I completely agree with you there. And I just want, we're coming near the hour mark now, so I'll start to wrap up. But I want to ask yourself, is there a sort of motto of Latin Trails or some sort of thing that you're just specifically trying to achieve? There's the sort of the one big message to sort of speak to people sort of about this whole project that you've sort of, poured all this experience and this thought into, these things you want to bring people. What would you like to say as a sort of thing to that?
Well, our objective is to share a little bit of the Ecuadorian way of life, where family is still very important, where friendship is very important, where the kindness of greeting a guest and allowing them to be part of our culture is really in our hearts, and sharing this treasure we have, both cultural and nature, so that it can actually one way is bringing local sustainable economy to the local people, for one part, and the other is to share the conservation efforts that are taking place in the Ecuadorian Amazon, the Galapagos Islands, and in several parts of the Andes, where we value water, where we value plant life, and where we value animal life, where this has been taken care of. And so that, maybe some of that can be taken back. It can change the way we see wildlife, and I think that, there's a lot of people around the world that have our same vision and come and visit us, but there's a lot of people that don't. And they come back, and we can send them back with that vision.
That's absolutely beautiful. And it's funny, my girlfriend was speaking about we have to go to South America and sort of travel around and things, and we do want to go to Peru as well. So I'm sure in the future we'll be able to hit you up. So I just want to find out, where can people find sort of information on Latin Trails, and if there's anything else you'd like to add before you go?
That Latin Trails is here to greet people from all over the planet. As a DMC, we offer unique experiences throughout Ecuador and Peru, meaning that we curate cultural activities from local families, from indigenous people, local tribes, both in the Andes and the Amazon. And in terms of nature, we can share access to places like the Galapagos Islands on a small yacht that reaches the further out islands, or a lodge that is in the Amazon rainforest that has its conservation project and is right next to wildlife reserves, as well as a hotel in Quito which is called Ila Experience Hotel, where you're in the heart of San Marcos neighborhood, artistic district, and you can interact with the people that live there. But not just these specific experiences, but many other throughout the entire region of Ecuador and Peru.
Well, and that's actually fantastic, and I'll include a link down in the show notes and whatnot on everywhere that I post this to Latin trails and things. I mean, I did have a glance on there before our chat, and I thought it did look absolutely incredible. So I'll definitely be sure to check that out when I come down and travel around South Americas. And yeah, Marcel, rather, it's been absolutely incredible speaking with you. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, Mike, thank you very much for having me at your show. I really do hope you can make it down here, and we would be very happy to show you around.
I would absolutely love it.
Thank you very much. You have a lovely rest of the evening.
Thank you very much for giving me your time. It's been an absolute brilliant to speak with you.
Take care.
And that's the end of the podcast. Thanks as always for tuning in, guys. And yeah, I'm glad all of you made it to the end and didn't quit halfway through. If you did and you came back to it, then thank you very much. As I said, the audio wasn't actually too bad. I just thought I'd give a little warning at the start. And as I also said at the start, if you like this episode and you like hearing about people talking about traveling and things like that, episode 2 of Genuine Chit-Chat, so really, really early on, I chatted with my friend TJ about her travels around Asia. So, check that out if you enjoy it. There's a link in the description to Latin Trails, so, check that out as well if you're interested in traveling around South America and you want to see what the sort of experience that Marcel has to offer. But apart from that, guys, I think next week is likely to be my chat with Goff from Beer Nuts Productions. I've got him scheduled for a chat on this Saturday. As I've said in the past, I don't generally say when I've got a new guest lined up, but I just like to say it if they're already been a guest before and if they're quite keen, So I should be chatting with him shortly again, which would be great. Talk about his new sort of comedy film that he's got out, and I believe he saw the Book of Mormon recently, so I want to talk to him about that because I saw it a little while ago as well. I've got my chat with Callum lined up on tomorrow I think it is. So he is the frontman, vocalist, singer-songwriter, lyricist, whatever, of Placeholder, which is a hardcore band, a local hardcore band. He's also one of my best friends, and I've known him for probably 15 plus years now. He was actually on an earlier episode of Genuine Chit-Chat as well. I believe it was episode 4, which is around the time where his old band Decipher became his current band Placeholder. So, who knows what we're going to talk about precisely. Well, his new EP and sort of other things to do with being a metal vocalist and whatnot, but that's something to look forward to. I'm just looking at the calendar. I don't think I've got another chat until the 23rd, which should be with an author person. And then after that, I should be guesting on another podcast, which would be cool. And then I haven't really got anything planned for August at the moment for recording. It's been incredibly busy, so I'm hoping this will be enough to last me through. But I just also want to say, as a reminder, on the 11th of August, which is obviously a Sunday, I won't be releasing an episode then because I'm going to be in Mexico. I'll keep everyone up to date with Instagram and that sort of stuff, what I kind of get up to if you're interested. But I'm not going to be releasing an episode then because I can't really be asked, if I'm being completely honest. I may end up releasing a little special episode the week before, just explaining that, and maybe me just sort of solo ranting and rambling on about God knows what. But yeah, apart from that, I think that's about it, guys. I'm going to go now. As I say, I really appreciate everyone listening to the podcast, everyone sharing, following, etc., doing all the usual things. This podcast only really survives from people, sharing it, word of mouth, that sort of thing, because I don't spend any money on advertising. But yeah, that's everything from me, guys. Thanks as always for tuning in. I appreciate each and every one of you listening, especially this far, and I'll talk to all of you next week.